Yep. So this is Night Lights, and it's a nice segue from the panel we just had. And so I'd like to introduce our speakers. The first speaker will be Norma Isahakian, Executive Director of Bureau of Street Lighting in the City of Los Angeles. And our second speaker will be Eric Lynxwiler, Board Member, Museum of Neon Art, MONA. And our third speaker will be Clement Lau, AICP DPPD, Department of Facilities Planner. So our first speaker is Norma, and we'll just let you go ahead and start.
Good morning, everybody. It's still morning. Welcome, and my name is Norma Isahakian, and I am the Executive Director for the Bureau of Street Lighting in the City of Los Angeles, as was mentioned. And basically, my job is to light the night. So to get started, I oversee the maintenance and operation of over 223,000 streetlights. That's something that people usually don't know how many streetlights we have in the city, but that's a little fact that there's quite a bit of streetlights in the city. So I'm going to talk a little bit about us. The City of Los Angeles has the second largest street lighting system in the nation. We are just right after New York, who has the largest street lighting system. As I mentioned, we have 223,000 streetlights, and the streetlights have over 400 different designs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history today as far as how those designs came about. The street lighting system covers over 4,500 miles of streets. So basically 2/3 of the city is lit. There is 1/3 that is not lit, so there's different areas of the city that don't really want lights. And we are funded by assessments. Just a little interesting fact, we're not general fund. We're not from the general fund of the city. So a little bit more about ourselves. We do have a full database of where all the streetlights are located. And in this database, it covers a lot of information, such as the light source. There's a lot of different attachments to your street lights. So after today, I'm sure you all go home and look out. Maybe you didn't notice a street light in front of your street, but now you will. And people tend to attach a lot of stuff to our street lights. In our GIS database, we also have circuitry, plans, specifications. And if there are street lights out, people call our 311 City of LA to report those street lights out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of streetlights in LA. The history of streetlights in LA basically started in the late 1800s. In 1860, that was when the first gas lamps came into the city, and there were actually traveling lamplighters that used to go around and light the lamps. So that was in the 1860s. Then around the 1880s came the DC electric lights, and these were the 150-foot towers. So for those of you who have looked a little bit into street lighting, long time ago there were towers of 150-foot high lights back in the 1880s, and they were called moon towers. So that was kind of interesting. There was a competition between LA and San Jose at the time as who was going to get the first moon tower. And then around the 1900s came the incandescent lights. And at this time, this is when the shorter poles started coming up. If you look at the history, and I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, but this is when the incandescent lights actually came in the early 1900s. And in 1905, really where the first kind of full street lighting system started was on Broadway. We had our first 130 street lights were actually on Broadway, and that was really the center of town at the time. And you know, from the early 1900s, just to kind of go back a little bit, you have to remember that there was really only a population of less than 10,000 people in City of LA. They were both mainly located around the LA River and La Plaza. And around the early 1900s is when what we called our Llewellyn Iron Works came, which for those of you who start looking at street lighting, you'll notice that term Llewellyn. It's kind of a popular term, and that came from the ironwork company that came during that time to start making street lights. And then in 1925, the city created the Bureau of Street Lighting, which I'm the director of. And that was basically because the system started growing and they wanted to make sure that the lights were maintained and operated. So really there were three main eras of street lights if you look at it. From the 1900s to the 1950s, is really where more of the ornamental decorative systems came. So if you look at the old systems in downtown, this is where more of the decorative systems. There was more ironworks, there was more craftsmanship at that time. Streetlights were made more slowly, and there was a lot of thought put into them and a lot of decoration. The second era began, and this particular light is on Wilshire Boulevard, just so you know, if anybody ever goes down Wilshire Boulevard, you want to look at those lights. The craftsmanship on that light is amazing. It's one of my favorite street lights. And then the second era began around the 1950s. So as the craftsmanship kind of dwindled away, we saw more of the lights that you see around LA, which is kind of the basic, I would call it the basic standard light. And unfortunately, the whole decorative system started to dwindle away. And we started seeing more of the taller poles. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the colors have changed over time and how the technology has changed, which is why at that time we could go more to the higher 30-foot poles, but we lost a lot of that craftsmanship that we had in the early 1900s. And then when the 1980s came, we started seeing the overlap of pedestrian style poles. So the second era was more when there was a car focus. At that time, there was a lot of car focus. So the pedestrian style low poles that we had in the early 1900s went away. In the 1950s, there was more focus on cars. But then as 1980s came, there was back focus again on the pedestrians. So then we started seeing a lot of pedestrian systems come back into the system. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology, and the reason is because this has a lot to do with the color change at night that people have seen over time. If you've lived in LA all of your life, you've seen a lot of color change. So the technology has changed over time. As I mentioned, we started with gas, and then it went to DC electric. This was in the late 1800s. And then, of course, the incandescents. So these were more of the white light that you would see. Mercury vapor also was what was a white light, and was more in the 1950s. It kind of was a white bluish color. And then around the 1970s, 80s came what we called high pressure sodium, which kind of the top picture up there, which kind of has that orange glow, which I think a lot of you may remember. At that time, there was a lot of orange glow. The lamps were not quite night sky friendly. They were more of a drop lens at that time. So it was kind of, and the light was bouncing everywhere. So we had this orange glow over LA. Recently, of course, now I think everybody's heard that we've had more of the LED streetlights come into play. It gives more back to the white light, and then LEDs have a whole range of color temperature. So depending on what you're putting out there, the light color will change. So you can go from a white blue, which is the higher color temperatures, down to 3000 Kelvin, which is more of the softer white. If you go down to the 2600, then you're getting a little bit more into the range where you get a little bit more of that yellowish comfort glow. So that's how kind of the colors have changed over LA at night. Now, streetlights in LA, really it's to light the night, but there really are three purposes and three responsibilities that streetlights have. One, of course, is safety and mobility, which is very important. But streetlights also provide ambiance and identity, and also they support night activity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. Safety and mobility. So, there's always a struggle between streetlights and nightlife, and some people like the lights, some people don't want the lights. But at the end of the day, when the lights go out, people are always calling us to get the lights fixed. And really the main purpose is the struggle between safety and those people that don't want less light is the safety and security. So how do you make that balance? There are certain lighting standards that the city has to follow. We try to, of course, reduce car accidents, pedestrian deaths. Unfortunately, in 2017, there's been an increase in pedestrian deaths, but we do have to follow certain standards to make sure that the lights are lit for cars and pedestrians. So there's always that balance between what is safety and and then of course there's some areas I'm gonna talk a little bit about later that really want a lot of light because they have a lot of night activity. So there's always this struggle between the two. Then of course we have ambiance and identity. Street lights have been part of a lot of art out there. We have the Chris Burke's Urban Light, which is in front of LACMA. Also, there's been the Sheila Klein's Vermonica, which is a light art that has been developed. So it's been in a couple art pieces. There's several books written about streetlights. And of course, the city of LA skyline, really, it's not just the skyline of the lights from the buildings, which there's a lot of that as well, and billboards and things like that. But of course, the streetlights as they light the streets as you go down the street. So it really has a sense of identity for the city of LA. And then, of course, night activity is something that's very critical to the city. We have certain areas, like I mentioned, 2/3 is lit, 1/3 is not. But there are certain areas that are really well lit. For instance, like Hollywood Boulevard, anything around event centers. This is on the left is our Staples Center. Of course, there's LAX, which there's a lot of activity. So really, there's different areas around the city that have a lot of different types of unique pedestrian systems. If you drive around, you'll also see different type of lights in different areas. So like Chinatown will have its own light system. Little Tokyo has its own set of street lights. So when you're driving around downtown or any other area, you'll see that sometimes in certain areas lights do change. It reflects the character. Sometimes it reflects the culture of that particular area. So that's also something very interesting. And now, as we've gone through all of this history and we've seen how it's gone from more of the decorative, ornate, craftsmanship streetlights into the basic modern lights, and right now the city of LA is looking into doing a streetlight design contest, which is going to be coming out this month. The city of LA wants to really request a design for our basic streetlight. This particular basic pole with just the light on it, we're going to try to get some kind of a design contest going that's going to really kind of bring a unique character to the light to say, I am LA. It's going to carry some interesting things such as a poetry plaque. We're asking people to bring their designs to maybe even increase shade in LA, because shade is something that LA is desperate need of. And also, as the streetlights, like I mentioned before, they tend to have a lot of attachment to them, and as smart city things are coming our way with all the technology changing, smart city is one of those things that the streetlights are going to start to carry. So whether it's air quality meters or whatever it is, these are where people are starting to put their smart city stuff, which is on our streetlights. Of course, the carriers want to put stuff on our streetlights, so it kind of becomes the hat rack of the city at sometimes. We take a look at it, and there's all sorts of things up and down on the streetlights. So streetlights are my life. I've been doing it for 30 years. And, we have a museum at our building. And so I just want to thank everybody for today. And hopefully, as you go home, now you'll notice the streetlight in front of your house.
Where's that?
This is down in downtown LA. We're at 12th and Hill. And we're on the second floor. If you go to our website, I didn't put it here, but if you go to the City of LA and you look for street lighting, there's a way you can sign up to come to our museum. We do a tour like once a month, and it just goes through kind of the history. And you'll be very surprised when you come to the museum how big actually the lights are. They're really huge. So anybody who ever wants to come, yes. Those are real lights that actually were saved from different salvage yards and then refurbished and put in place. So those are actually, and they come from LA, some of them come from Pasadena, but those are actual street lights, yes.
Oh, it's not on? Hello? Oh, good. So let's save your questions, write your questions down. We'll, at the end of this panel, we'll direct them to them then. So our next speaker is Eric Lynxwiler, board member of MONA, Museum of Neon Art. Thank you.
Good morning. Hello. Happy to see you guys. I'm going to share some colored lights with you this morning. Yes, I work with the Museum of Neon Art. I have been with the Museum of Neon Art for 20 years. We call the Museum of Neon Art MONA. She's been in downtown Los Angeles since 1981 and is currently in Glendale, the city of Glendale, a little tiny museum with an absolutely enormous collection. Now, when I look to save neon signs, I look for the sign's cultural, aesthetic, or technical importance. I want to make sure that that sign coming into the Museum of Neon Art's collection represents something in this list. Now, when it comes to neon Los Angeles was the absolute king of neon. Los Angeles grew up with the automobile, with the advent of neon in the 1920s, and it just boomed all the way into the 1950s. Our city was completely decorated with that beautiful, warm, colored light. And almost all of it is gone. The Museum of Neon Art goes out into the city of Los Angeles. We go into the nation and we save neon signs. In this photograph of the Broadway Theater District in downtown Los Angeles, about 4 of those vertical signs still exist. All the rest wound up in the trash. The Museum of Neon Art celebrates neon, even if it's not here. We try to celebrate the past of Los Angeles and say, this is the way it was. At this intersection of Vine Street at Hollywood, all of those neon signs, including that lovely Firefly cocktail bar on the far left, they're all gone. But there is one neon sign in this photograph that was saved, and it's right in the middle, high up on a pole. It's the Brown Derby Derby, the Brown Derby from Hollywood and Vine. That Brown Derby has been restored. It's in the Museum of Neon Art's collection, having gone into a scrapyard, a private collector, eventually making its way as a donation to the Museum of Neon Art. We haven't taken away all of its history. We've cleaned it up, repainted it, brought the light back, kept as many of the original neon tubes as we can. You might see an R and a Y that are a little bit brighter than the other tubes. That's because they're newer tubes. We've repaired those. The museum really likes to celebrate that wonderful warm glow. Now, these gigantic lights decorating the city may not be glowing in our nighttime anymore, but here we have a museum that is a museum of nighttime illumination. Come to the city of Glendale, come to our little museum, walk into the darkness, and you might see a giant neon dragon staring back at you. The Brown Derby is one of our culturally important icons. It is one of the crown jewels of the museum's collection, and we also have the Chinese theater dragon. It's a 40-foot long neon dragon that's animated with like an 11-part animation. When that Chinese theater sign came to us, it was a giant trash heap, sorry. It was treated so poorly, so badly, it was going to be thrown away. It was Hollywood Heritage that stepped in and said, wait a minute, Museum of Neon Art needs that. So we got both of the Chinese theater's 40-foot-long dragons. We kept this one and we restored it. We brought back its original paint colors, its original animation. We put all new tubes on it, put it on wheels. And with the other dragon, the sister dragon to that one, what did we do with it? We donated it to the Natural History Museum. Let's restore that one too. Anyway, this beautiful sign works fabulously. It's inspiring to stand next to this gigantic monster and think of all of the hundreds, if not thousands, of movie premieres that took place right underneath those beautiful little claws and its flashing face. Yeah, but not every sign has to be gigantic to be beloved. This is the Busy Bee hardware store from Santa Monica. This little 3-foot round bee with animated wings, it's from a almost 100-year-old mom and pop hardware store. We're saving it because this neon sign is animated, it flaps its wings, it's adorable, it makes people smile, but we're also trying to save that mom and pop story of a 100-year-old business in Santa Monica that is no longer. When I first joined the Museum of Neon Art, the Museum of Neon Art did not collect or save text. They didn't believe that typography was art, and I changed that. We received a donation of a Sears sign. That Sears sign, in its buoyant mid-century script, it's such a positivity in that angle. It's a burst of happiness in typography. And it says Sears. And then below that, we have a porcelain enamel Art Deco Eagle Rock drugs. We had to save these signs. It was too important to see these go away. Not every neon sign is created equal. I still try to look at these signs for their cultural, aesthetic, and technical importance. When I first saw this sign from Glendale, California, I looked at it and said, that's a piece of crap. But I'm wrong. I've learned my aesthetic vision of what that sign is was totally incorrect. I said, he has one leg and she has no legs. Why would we save this blob? But then I lived with it for a while and I looked at them, and it is two Spanish dancers advertising a Mexican restaurant on Colorado Boulevard in Glendale. The city of Glendale removed this sign because they said it's non-meritorious. We're outlawing neon. This is in the early 1980s. We're outlawing neon. You have to get rid of it. There's no grandfathering. The Museum of Neon Art received this sign and coincidentally is now in Glendale with this sign in its collection. But the layers of tubing, let's take a look at her face. There is a blue line that forms almost like a part in her hair. That blue line in the part in her hair comes down to become her blue eyes, then her nose. It seeks up and it becomes her chin going down to her neck. That line then continues to become her folded over arm. That's all one tube. If you look at something like his hand, yes, they look like wet socks. The hands are all wet socks. Another thing that I had against this sign. But the diameter of tubing on his hand from his coat is different. This sign is 30 feet up in the air, was 30 feet up in the air. You take it down and you can see that the artist who designed this actually used a thinner diameter tubing on the hands, on the arms, on her facial features to make them more delicate than the thicker clothing, the more bold clothing. I started falling in love with this neon sign and then started to acknowledge, wait a minute, this is a Spanish dancer couple advertising a Mexican restaurant and she's blonde. We have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan woman dancing in a Spanish dress advertising Mexican food in Glendale. This is fantastic. I started falling for this thing as a cultural piece of our mid-century identity. It's let's just mix it all up in Southern California and see what shakes out. Yes, we did have to save this neon sign, and I'm glad that we did. Now, this fella comes from Oakland, California. He's a double-sided 6 foot by 6 foot piece of toast. And it's from the Hofbrau bar. Now he's a bartender, obviously, pulling down on his tap, filling a beer. Every 2 holes that you see in this design, that is one tube. Every 2 holes, that's the beginning of an electrode, then the tube, and then the ending of an electrode. Piecing this blank sign together would have been impossible without existing neon tubes or photography, trying to see, does this hole go to that hole? Does this hole go to that one? It's kind of a mess, but putting it all together, we see how spectacular this little fellow is. He is a very difficult sign to maintain because he is so dense, and believe it or not, he has a secret. This 1950s neon sign is actually a refurbished 1920s neon sign. Peel apart this layer and there's another sign underneath it that they recycled to create this one, making it even more difficult for us to maintain it. But in terms of animation, you can't get any better than this little fella. His beer fills up level by level by level. It foams and then he pulls down on his tap, he lifts up on his tap, he pulls down and up. His face, if you see there's another hidden face underneath it, he actually turns his head to you and smiles a big red smile. With his furry little eyebrows and lovely handlebar, yeah, he's a wonderful, wonderful piece of neon. And yes, restored in the Museum of Neon Art. Now this one, it seems incredibly simple, but from a typography standpoint, we have that cursive western, a bold motel, no vacancy below. This is a Venice Beach motel. Added to our skyline about the 1950s. It came down in the 1980s, made its way to the Museum of Neon Art. It is technically a marvel because that diameter tubing that forms the orange lasso is almost 1 inch in diameter. Very few neon benders can take a piece of tubing that is 1 inch in diameter and actually bend it without collapsing the glass. In giant sweeping curves, it takes a master in order to make that 1 inch diameter neon tube. Technically, this sign is outstanding. If you think about it in terms of its cultural base, this neon sign, it's right next to the beach. They could have advertised with an oceanic or a sea theme, a beach theme, but no, they chose what was popular on TV in that time period, and they wound up giving you Western Americana celebrating cowboy culture that we were watching on TV in the 1950s. This sign speaks to us on many levels and is part of our motel collection. The Museum of Neon Art, basically with me, we wound up doing a neon exhibition that I wish everybody had seen, and I wish it was just up permanently. That neon exhibition was called Liquor, Motels, and Live Nude Girls. It was lowbrow neon elevated. We brought all of these fantastic neon signs into our collection, restored every one of our motel signs, and just decked ourselves out with a very apparently Instagrammable display that people wound up loving. It was lowbrow neon. But I have to always ask, why do I put myself through these saves? I have dumpster dived. I have literally picked trash out of dumpsters and put them on display in the Museum of Neon Art because I see not trash, but glowing pieces of our society that need to be relit, restored, brought back to life. This is a 1955 Anaheim neon way on top of the La Palma pie shop. The mom and pop story of this is that Dad died and Mom and daughter couldn't continue running the restaurant. They came to the Museum of Neon Art and said, would you take our giant neon chicken? Well, of course we'll take your giant neon chicken. So early in the dark of morning, we come out with our cranes, come out with the crew, and we take those pieces down with welders' torches and we take them to the Museum of Neon Art or one of our warehouses. Mom and daughter from the La Palma Chicken Pie Shop have come in to visit. It's their memory of Dad. In order to come and celebrate him and what their family accomplished, we have a giant 1955 neon chicken on display. So some people look at it and they see a comical cartoon, and then I look at it and I know what the story is behind that fantastic sign. When saving these giant neon boxes, it's a little bit of torture with the bruises that come with it. When you're saving these giant boxes, they are, and I need to get a tetanus shot again. They are giant rust buckets covered in broken glass. They weigh a ton and sometimes they're filled with bird crap. Why the hell? Why? But we take these signs down, we clean them up. We spend time, money, and bloodshed in order to get them going again. We are saving this little piece of the nighttime sky in order to put them on display, and I want everyone to come and see them. I stand there in the glow of these neon signs and I actually get emotional. To me, this is almost a religion. I could genuflect. So I'm wrapping up by saying, please come and visit the Museum of Neon Art and celebrate Los Angeles at night in our little museum. We're a little museum with a giant collection. If you'd like to celebrate neon at night with me in a summertime tour, I'm also the 20-year guide of the Museum of Neon Art's Neon Cruises. We fill a top deck of a convertible double-decker bus and we drive the streets of Los Angeles looking at neon, architecture, history, culture, where to eat, where to drink, and you get to put up with my bad jokes. It's a really good tour. You might also be interested in my book, Spectacular Illumination, about the city of Los Angeles, put out by Angel City Press. Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So, streetlights are Norma's passion, or her life, and neon is his religion. I just can't wait to hear what Clement feels about parks at night. So Clement Lau is our next speaker, and we're all set up. Great.
Okay. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Clement Lau. I'm a facilities planner with the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation. And when I tell people I work for the Department of Parks and Recreation, most ask me whether I watch the show Parks and Recreation. Do anybody watch that? That's good to know. So my presentation is a little bit about park planning as well as recreation programs with a focus on one that some of you may have heard is called Parks After Dark. And I just want to begin with telling you that not only is my day job as a park planner, I also spend a lot of time at parks with my family. I also spend a lot of time thinking about parks and writing about parks. And so these are some of the articles that I've written over the years. The most recent one being the one on the top left, called Parks and Recreation Night version. And I think, interestingly, that's, I think, how Bill found me. And the other articles you see, basically, when you think Parks and Recreation, most people think of just fun and games. But with my kind of writing and thinking about it, I'm really trying to elevate the discussion that Parks and Recreation is more than just fun and games, but it's also about health and wellness and sustainability and community cohesion. And so some of these topics you see, what I've been focusing on. Another topic is engagement, especially with youth and children in park planning and design. So I already told you this. Some of the pictures you see here are from our Parks After Dark program, which I'll explain in greater detail in the second half of the presentation. So you may be wondering why I'm going to talk to you about park planning. Well, first of all, that's what I do. I'm a park planner. But I wanted to give you kind of the big picture and also provide some context for the work that we do in Parks and Recreation. We are moving more towards data-driven kind of park planning. It's probably more thoughtful, intentional, and strategic than you think Parks and Rec people are. But we are actually really doing a lot of work in terms of data, and this is a study that we completed in 2016 called the Countywide Parks Needs Assessment, and it was unprecedented effort to understand all the parks and recreational facilities in Los Angeles County, including both cities and unincorporated areas. So basically, this gave us a really good and detailed picture of what we have in terms of parks and recreational facilities. We looked at various park metrics, meaning how we measure park needs. So we looked at park acreage, park amenities, the condition of those amenities, park access, whether folks are within half-mile or 10-minute walk of a park. And then here you see on this slide just some of the images we have in the report in terms of how we're doing in providing parks and recreational facilities to meet the needs of the community. So this is kind of big picture inventory in terms of the types of parks and the acreages of parks that we have. So that's local, regional, regional open space, and natural areas. Most of you are probably familiar with local parks or some of our regional parks. And then here's some pictures of what I mean. So the top left is a regional park. I think that's Whittier Narrows, one of the parks that we maintain. The bottom left is more of a local park. And then to the top right, Hollywood Bowl, not a lot of people know this, is actually one of the facilities maintained by my department, operated in partnership with the LA Philharmonic. And then the bottom right is the Vasquez Rocks, one of our natural areas. So there's a real variety of parks and recreational facilities in LA County. And here are some examples of those facilities at night. These were all taken last year, where I took my family to various events. So the one at Grand Park was kind of holiday lights. That's a free event. Arboretum, that's called a Moonlight Forest. Some of you may have visited. It just started again last weekend. And then to the right is called Enchanted at Descanso Gardens. So these are all great shows, but the challenge is they're not free, with the exception of the one at Grand Park. So I think admissions for those two shows are, I think, at least $25 per person. And This again is from the needs assessment. This map we have shown a lot in presentations, in planning conferences, locally as well as nationally, because it's our attempt to highlight the areas that are most in need of parks, most in need of attention and resources. So those red and orange areas you see on the map. And then those are what we call the very high and high need areas, and approximately half of the population of LA County live in those areas, and that's 5 million residents. We have a real disparity in terms of where parks are distributed, real disparity in how park funding is distributed. So in our work, we're really trying to address those inequities and prioritize funding and attention and planning for those red and orange areas. Something that we have also done recently is what we call the sports needs assessment, looking at various factors to identify areas that in particular need of certain sports facilities, whether it be baseball, basketball, soccer. And where this has come in handy for us is we work with foundations of professional sports organizations like the Dodgers Foundation, because they invest in parks across the county, like Dodgers Dream Fields, and they would ask us, well, where do you think we need more Dream Fields? And we're able to provide them with this data that shows, hey, this area is particularly in need of baseball. They have a high youth population. They have a high park need. And they also spend a lot of money on baseball-related kind of goods. So this is a tool that we've been using. A project that I managed a few years ago, and we're still in the process of implementing, is called the Community Parks and Recreation Plans. And it really focused on 6 of the most park-poor communities in the county. And so they're park poor in terms of acreage as well as access. They also have a high level of childhood obesity. And these are also the places where we have Parks After Dark program offered, because many of these communities do not have the options for entertainment or recreation that many of us take for granted, like going to the theater or going exercise classes or recreation classes. So this example here is a map of East Los Angeles, and with the red and orange, again, areas, particular neighborhoods that we determined to be most in need of parks. And then just this year, we joined this 10-minute walk campaign, which is a nationwide movement to increase park access. And basically the idea is to increase the percentage of population within walking distance of a park. And so when we talk about park access, it's not just about building a park and somebody will come. That's a big factor that comes into safety. So when we speak to residents, a lot of them ask for improved lighting, street lighting, as well as more police and sheriff presence. So in my work, one thing that happens a lot at night is community meetings. And these are some of the more memorable pictures that I took. The one on the top left is, always remember that one. I think a teenage person felt necessary to bring the Captain America shield to one of our meetings. And then the one on the top right, we often involve kids and children in the design of parks, so that was a picture that they drew. And so, yeah, so a lot of our work actually happened at night in terms of engaging community when people are available for these type of meetings. So let me switch gears and go a little into recreational programming. And I give you all that context on park planning because a lot of our planning and thinking and resource allocation is now driven by that data that I showed you. And that's going to affect our staff allocation and allocation of resources for programs like this one. I'm going to try to play a video. Hopefully that works.
I'm John Wicker, the Director for the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation. Summer is our busiest time of the year, with thousands of visitors flocking to our county parks each and every day. But when the sun goes down, most county parks generally close, leaving many children and families yearning for evening programs and fun. That's why in 2010, the Department of Parks and Recreation launched Parks After Dark, or PAD. Now, the program started with only 3 parks, and this year, PAD has grown to include 33 Los Angeles County parks.
That's right, John. Parks After Dark has dozens of programs, including concerts, movies, team programs, swimming, and life skills for people of all ages that are sure to keep everyone entertained and active.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Parks After Dark. We have games, we have face painting, we have arts and crafts, we have indoor and outdoor activities, we have e-STEAM activities, we have healthy cooking, and we have much, much more. And through the partnership with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, they have helped us to create safe, fun-filled evenings that our community can enjoy, and our staff enjoys it too.
So one of the best things for me as a parent from Parks After Dark is my kids get to experience free programs in cheer, basketball, tennis, cooking classes, and dance, versus the regular sports season. I have to pick and choose which of my 5 get to play basketball, soccer, or baseball.
I've been coming to Park After Dark for 4 years, and I enjoy being here because there's a lot of people. It's a huge neighborhood, and everybody have fun. We like to sing, we like to dance, so it's nice to be here. And I'll be here this year because I enjoy it.
Por un amor, me desvelo y vivo apasionado, tengo un amor. Yo vengo por las tardes, en la noche, y pues todo está muy tranquilo, tiene su luz. Y venimos a disfrutar un poco, a caminar, y pues muy bonito todo esto. Me gusta bailar, me gusta cantar, me gusta convivir, y pues la paso bien.
Find Parks After Dark activities and a variety of other great programs, classes, and special events in our latest summer PNR online magazine. Our PNR magazine continues to be a great resource for our PAD programming and other activities that everyone can enjoy regardless of age. I encourage you to take a moment and look for yourself. Enjoy all of our programming, and remember,
Parks make life better.
So that was a video that we produced, and those are the real voices, although it's all animated, so I'm just playing games. Yeah, I think in the background. Actually, I have one more video I'll end with. Okay. So I thought that would be a good introduction to our Parks After Dark program, or PAD. And this program actually very much well studied. There was a study done by UCLA last year of the benefits that it offers, and I would encourage you to take a look at that report if you have time and interested. So one of the things that the program really wanted to achieve was increase access to recreational programming and services, and these are some of the statistics. And I'll just point out that the top most popular activity is movie nights, because it's just not cheap to go to a movie these days. It's like, is it $20, $25? So this is what a lot of our families enjoy doing when they go to a PAD program. Another big finding from the report is the reduction in crime, and there's also this perception of the relationship with the Sheriff's Department. As you saw from the video, the sheriffs are very much part of our program, and and through the program, the relationships have built, and that's really helped. Also, in terms of health, the study found improvements in the health of the participants, increased life expectancy, and those are the statistics that you see there. And then also money matters. So in terms of cost savings, PAD is very much a prevention program for health as well as crime. It allows families, especially youth, to be engaged in positive activities. So these are some of the estimated savings in terms of criminal justice costs as well as chronic disease costs. And I'll just end with a final video, and this is one that was produced by the National Recreation and Park Association for when our department received an award for Best in Innovation for the PAD program last year. So let me end with that.
People think everyone who lives in Los Angeles County has a big house with a swimming pool and that the streets are lined with palm trees. San Marino, the Palisades, or Malibu, where the ocean just waits outside a window. But that's not reality. Many neighborhoods in Los Angeles County offer little or no opportunity to those living there. Some neighborhoods are terrorized by life-threatening gang violence or human trafficking. And recruits to this lifestyle are often effortless, and they are young.
The Park After Dark program initially started out dealing with at-risk youth, but as time progressed, it started dealing with more with families. And that's when we started programming for families instead of just at-risk youth. Parks After Dark is innovative in providing great services for families and youth. We've had kids not too long ago that took a negative path in life. They got involved in the gangs, they got involved in the drugs and human trafficking. But when we provided this Parks After Dark program on the parks, wow, it turned their lives around.
I feel like Parks After Dark has changed me and my family because in my childhood, there's always danger around, and I'm trying to be that person to help out the other people. I just never had the opportunity to do this for other people, so that now that I got the opportunity, I feel great about it.
Marcus was a troubled youth when he was coming up. And he's now a reformed gang member. He came to me one day and said he wanted to provide haircuts free for the community. He came out, he did that. He didn't turn anyone away.
Yeah, for 3 years now I've been participating with the Parks After Dark program, helping the kids and doing the free haircuts and everything. It's been a pretty big turnout. Stuff that I probably would have wished I'd have had when I was at that age, because we didn't have Parks After Dark when I was young. But a lot of these kids' parents grew up, they gave up on them early in the game. I could definitely see how it changed the kids' life in the community. A bunch of positive stuff going on in the park, and we need that in the community.
And with these programs, they're not asking you what you can give them, they're asking you what they can give you.
It definitely made me feel like it was part of a tight-knit community that's very open and friendly, and it showed my kids that it's okay to say hello to people, and it's okay to wave, and to be nice, to be generous.
We can spend more time together and get closer, have fun, and get to know each other even better than we already do.
The programs helped me get closer to my family.
They enjoy what they're doing, and they do it because they love to do it, and how it affects the kids and how it affects the community, and it's wonderful.
I love everything about Parks After Dark.
Still not, is it working? Okay. Oh, okay. If our panel wants to come up and we can engage the audience with questions, or panelists can engage each other. So do we have any, Bill?
I have a question for Norma. Can you just give us the extent of the kinds of things you could put in the streetlights for smart cities? Like what stuff? I know the air quality measurements and all, but what else is going on?
So, is this working? Is this working? Okay, I can't really tell. So it seems to be endless at this point. You know, it first started with LAPD putting cameras on our poles, but now with technology that it's really exponentially expanding, it's increased significantly. So we've put electrical vehicle charging stations on our streetlights. We have air quality meters. We actually have eco counters, which count people, cars and bikes. There's a lot of sensors out there. We don't have them yet, but there's sensors that can, of course, temperature sensors. There's motion sensors, which they're talking about earthquake sensing. Of course, I mentioned the air quality sensors. We on the street lights themselves, we have these remote monitoring devices that actually are sensors themselves. They tell us if the lights are on or off. They're not on all of our street lights, but they also track electricity. So it seems to be that it's just kind of an ongoing, endless thing as technology expands and people come up with more ideas of what they want to track or see. So it just seems to be getting more and more. So we're trying to get our hands around it because we have streetlights that look like a hat rack with things hanging all over them. They start looking pretty ugly. So we're trying to get this design going, not just to basically have a streetlight that says I am LA, but to also think about all these things that need to be attached to our streetlights so that we can do it in a better planned way.
Yes. Shall I walk over? Yep.
My question is for Norma and Clement. I was wondering if, when thinking about a revamp to a park or street lights, you consider wildlife and light pollution and types of bulbs that you use, or where you put stronger bulbs versus softer bulbs, and knowing now more and more about what wildlife do live in the city and how they're affected by light pollution, does that ever come into consideration? I know safety probably often trumps lighting decisions, but I was wondering if that is a factor in any of these planning meetings or anything like that.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, streetlights always has this struggle between safety and other measures. And one of the things that's happened over time, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of color changes on streetlights. So that's always something that we're constantly thinking about. So 2/3 of the city are lit, 1/3 is not. A lot of the areas up in the northern area are not lit. This is areas where a lot of people have horses. They don't like streetlights as much. We also adjust color. Now that we have LEDs, which actually is good and bad, but I think the good part of it is that there's such a color range now. When it first started, the color range wasn't there, but now it's getting a lot better. So as we go out to the coast, we actually drop the color range a bit to the 2600 levels. When we're going up towards next to the mountains, we try to make that adjustment as well. So, and in the residential areas, we're dropping it down to the 2600 level Kelvin temperature levels. So we try to make that adjustment. It still always is that struggle between safety. So the moment you want to reduce a street light because somebody calls and complains and says, I don't like it, can you bring the light down? The neighbor next to them calls and says, why did you bring my light down? So we always have this thing. So we are trying to train our engineers also to kind of take that into account. We're not quite trained in that way, but now with LED on all the different ranges, we're trying to get to that point where we can kind of take that into account.
So with most of our parks, they are open from sunrise to sunset. But our parks, because we have parks countywide and we have a whole variety of parks, so there are no lights at our natural areas or wildlife sanctuaries. But for our urban parks, there's that delicate balance. So when we have those park design workshops, and I just had one maybe a month ago, and you would think most people, they'll tell us what they want, like a playground or sports courts. Safety has become such a major concern. We have people just drawing street lights, lights on this site plan that we have all over, because they said we need more lights for safety. So that's something we need to balance. That we're using more LED lights, and also for our sports courts and fields, we're trying to make the lights more focused, so it doesn't spill over as much.
Hi. Hello. I had a question for Eric. So what is the typical time frame of your restorations? I'm sure it varies based on size and the technicality of the sign, but do you maybe have a range of like the shortest to the longest, or maybe just your average?
Restoring a sign takes time and money. Finding time, finding money, but also finding the people to do the restoration. The restoration of the Grauman's Chinese Theater Dragon at 40 feet long with everything at play had to be a mass coordination of many months, because we had to find the people who could abate the rust, people who could build us a stand, folks who could recreate the internal motors in order to get the animation. Then we had a tube bender that we had to seek out. It was many months in the making. One of our simplest signs in the museum's collection was a fastened seat belts. And it took 7 years to restore because it kept getting pushed aside. We have lots of neon signs at the museum's collection that we want to restore, and the big impetus for that is once the sign gets adopted. We do have adopt-a-sign programs at the museum, and once somebody picks out that sign and helps fund it, then we can focus on that sign and get it lit even more quickly. I'm a big pusher for getting these things into the museum and getting them restored and put on display. I'm working to put that Sears sign back together again in our lobby, believe it or not, all 25 feet of it. It's an effort.
Hi, I have a question for Norma. So I'm waiting for the announcement of the streetlight design competition with bated breath, and I'm just wondering, in your opinion, if for the designers, are you looking for people from Los Angeles? I know that so much of Los Angeles streetlights were related to homegrown companies. A lot of them weren't from there, but companies like Llewellyn that you mentioned were based in downtown LA. And second, what advice would you have to people wanting to submit designs? What for you makes a great streetlight?
So yeah, I mentioned our street lighting design contest. It's going to be coming out this week. I believe we have from the mayor. The mayor is going to be announcing it himself on Wednesday. So we actually have 3 different levels for this street lighting design contest. One is the very professional level, which is going to probably include the big designers, maybe some architect firms, things like that. They don't have to necessarily be based in LA, but we encourage them to come to LA, visit our museum, kind of get to know what is LA, because I think someone mentioned earlier, LA is sprawled out. It's not necessarily like some of the other cities, but it's beautiful in that way. So I would recommend for those people to basically get to know what LA is, and when you want to design it, there's so many different elements that you want to put into it. But, streetlights are kind of like a tricky thing, right? So you either want to notice them or you don't. So they either blend into the background or they don't. So I think that's going to be kind of the trick of what the architect or whatever the designer is thinking as far as what kind of statement that streetlight is going to make. We are also going to open it to students, which is going to be actually, to me, very exciting. We're going to ask professional students who are in colleges to basically come up with a design. It's going to be almost like a team effort for them to actually do a design. And we're going to ask for those students, colleges who are in LA County. But we're also going to do a high school design contest, which we're going to ask for any high school in LA City. And that's going to basically be more of a lower scale design, but it's going to kind of get them involved as far as what type of streetlight they want to look at. And these are the students who actually live in LA, so it's their city. So we want to see what they want their streetlight to look at. We're going to everybody's going to have some type of financial award. The students in LA will actually get $500 for the winners. We're going to pick, I think, 3 of them is going to be picked. So it's a good way for them to get involved with the city, to kind of tell us what they want their streetlight to look like. We're going to call those inspirational awards, and then there's going to be a larger award for the architect who or the designer who's going to get the final award. So I think everybody should just think of what is LA, what they want their street light to look like, and what it's going to have to carry. And shade has come into something that no other street light has done, where shade, we're asking them to consider shade, because in LA we have an issue with shade. There's not enough trees. So as you walk through LA, especially in the summer, and I do this all the time, you're always looking for that shade, right? So you're always looking for that tree. Or sometimes what I do is I go from street light to street light, and everybody stands in that little line where the shade is. So we're asking them to think of how can we expand that little line of shade, because everybody lines up right there. So that's another element that no other street light has ever actually had. So we're kind of excited about it.
I'm going to throw in a question directed at streetlights because I love glowing things in the dark. I'm a big fan of the Wilshire Boulevard streetlight. It's my favorite. It's a gigantic lantern. It used to stretch from downtown LA all the way to Fairfax. Most are gone. It's just from about Westlake, MacArthur Park to downtown. Now, no streetlights to my knowledge are historic cultural monuments. They're not protected, but are there any streetlights that you are protecting that are sacred to the Los Angeles area?
So yes, no streetlight is actually classified as protected, but for the city, we love our decorative streetlights. This street lighting design is not going to impact those. We try our best not to remove any of our historical ornamental streetlights. That actually is also my favorite streetlight. If you ever come to our museum, we have one, an actual size, which is about my height. Somebody could actually walk, sit inside of it. And it's beautiful. The amount of craftsmanship on that streetlight is amazing. So we try our best to make sure that we don't remove those streetlights. We haven't really gotten to the point of actually recreating that one because we don't, I think eventually, every streetlight has a life. We have streetlights out there that are over 100 years. But yeah, we're definitely are inside the city protecting those lights because we love our downtown lights on Main Street and the ones on Wilshire. And there's ones that actually have a little dragon on it. If you go around City Hall, there's a streetlight that if you look at the top, there's a little teeny dragon on it. So there's so many different streetlights with a lot of different stories behind them.
So I'm just going to add the idea for the contest. The great eminent historian Kevin Starr in Landscape Electric called, Paris is the city of lights, LA is city of neon. So maybe if we can incorporate neon into the design of these new city lights, it'll capture the essence of LA, right? Okay, so, I was.
So, Eric, you mentioned a city that had banned neon, and I'm just wondering, are there a lot of cities that have banned neon, and is that a continuing trend, or are some of them recognizing the fact that, there's some value or some cultural significance to these signs?
It's a gigantic city-by-city difference. The city of Los Angeles now has sign districts that welcome neon. Downtown Los Angeles has the Broadway Theater District. They welcome neon. Hollywood Boulevard has its own sign district that welcomes neon. But in the rise and fall of neon throughout the decades, we've seen neon absolutely peak in the 1950s and then completely drop off in the 1960s, 70s. It was a brand new, beautiful, welcoming, bright technology of modernism in your great-grandpa's day, but by the time it reached its age of 30, 40 years old, it was fading, failing, and got replaced by backlit plastic. Also, the enormous amount of neon that was out there, legally or illegally, on the streets of Los Angeles. In order to be a modern business, you didn't just have a sign in your window, you had to compete with everybody on Ventura Boulevard, which means that you had to have a sign over your door, in your window, outlining your building, outlining the door, on a pole, on the roof, hanging off the side with an arrow pointing to the parking lot. It became so much that cities started to ban it. And Glendale was one of those cities that did it in the 1980s. The city of Santa Monica did it in the 1990s, and just without any grandfathering, just started sweeping it all away. The Museum of Neon Art has tried to catch what we can. Oh yeah, Anaheim did it in the early 2000s around Disneyland in order to get rid of all those mom and pop motel signs. It still happens, but we also see welcoming districts like Hollywood and downtown LA that are bringing neon back to these areas. That original image that I showed of the Broadway Theater District, when I started giving neon tours of the Broadway Theater District, it was completely 100% dark. Not a single neon sign was functioning. And in my 20 years of giving those tours, there's 6 marquees of the 12 historic theaters, vertical signs that have been restored by the Museum of Neon Art, the Cultural Affairs Department, and City Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles. We're getting these streets relit, and by getting them relit, we're also seeing a new play of people and commerce that are coming to the streets at night, which is a whole other subject that we should talk about. You light those neon signs, and the people will follow.
Oh, great. Yeah, so as an astronomer, I'm supposed to hate streetlights. I'll just put that out there. But despite that, I want to ask a question maybe to everyone in some sense. The combination of shade, directing light downward, and sustainability could all be reached possibly by something that built in some kind of photovoltaic. And I'm wondering if the combination of photovoltaics and LED give us a possibility of having our lighting system completely off the grid. And then to open the question up to you as well, do you see a future museum of LED technology, and are there some interesting LED things that we should know about?
Oh, you're killing me with that.
Okay. So yeah, there's always been this struggle between street lighting and basically the night sky. So back in the 80s when I showed you 2 pictures of the city, you could see on my presentation, we actually joined the Dark Sky Association to try to reduce our light. But of course, we are tasked with lighting night, right? So we started working with some of our teardrop fixtures, which are the drop lens, which really kind of gives you that stray light, to try to make them more flat, which gives you a more focused light. Now the LEDs also bring that focus because they're very highly directional. I think, and of course LEDs are all flat glass, so you don't get those stray lights that go off, which is one of the reasons that the picture kind of went a little bit darker. But then there's also something to consider when you send more light down, depending on the surface that you're hitting, there's also the backlight that goes up. So there's always that kind of balance between how much light do you want to use to make sure you have the safety, but at the same time, even though you're directing it, it goes somewhere. So you still kind of get that bounce on the ground. If you try to direct it too much, it will bounce back up. So we're always in that struggle as far as trying to keep the sky glow down. It's always going to be something, and of course we are LA, so it's always going to have this kind of cover of lights. And yeah, that's we're always thinking about that as well. We always get calls from astronomers who are like, "Can you turn your lights down?"
The Museum of Neon Art was the very first neon museum founded in the world. Now there's a dozen all over the globe. I have 2 in Europe that I know of, 1 in Asia. I can't imagine there being an LED museum, but I won't say no to that future possibility. The Museum of Neon Art has displayed modern LED artwork in our collection. We have shown LED art, but LED in terms of signage kind of makes me cringe. And the best worst example of that is Felix Chevrolet just down the street. It was a neon sign, used to be neon, now it's fading, aging LED that's not green technology, by the way. It doesn't really bring a smile to my face to say LED signs exist. The fact is, neon has tried to be, there are different technologies that have tried to kill neon over the years. Backlit plastic was one of them. And now we have LEDs and giant television sets that are trying to kill neon all over again. But the joy of neon to me is that it's gas, glass, and electricity. It is completely analog technology. You don't need a computer to run it. Just need gas, glass, and electricity. So I think neon will stick around a lot longer, especially if I'm saving it.